Good afternoon. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Nutrition, Oversight, and Department Operations, titled The Potential Implications of Eliminating Broad-Based Categorical Eligibility for SNAP Households, will come to order. Let me begin with my statement. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the impact of any potential action by the administration to eliminate or dramatically restrict the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program's use of categorical eligibility, or CAT-L. CAT-L is a long-standing bipartisan policy that helps streamline the administration of social service programs for states. According to the Congressional Budget Office, eliminating broad-based CAT-L would mean 400,000 eligible households would lose SNAP benefits. An estimated 265,000 eligible children would lose direct access to free school meals. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time in recent memory that changes to CAT-L have been offered by our Republican colleagues. A similar proposal was included in the House-passed 2014 Farm Bill, and again, the same attempt was made during last year's Farm Bill negotiations. In both cases, Congress debated the issue, and the proposals were ultimately excluded from the final conference agreements. I believe these ill-conceived attempts to eliminate broad-based CAT-L were unsuccessful in part because CAT-L is a state option that is widely used. 43 states and territories, including many with Republican governors, use broad-based categorical eligibility. These states rely on CAT-L for its flexibility to provide critical assistance to those in their respective states in need of a hand up and to make ends meet. CAT-L enables states to better meet the needs of hardworking families by matching gross income qualifications with the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF program, and SNAP. As I've said previously, Republicans love talking about states' rights, providing state flexibility, and handing over to the states the administration of federal safety net programs. But when it comes to putting that rhetoric into practice for SNAP, they want something very different. This despite decades of proof that CAT-L provides states the flexibility they need and want to better serve vulnerable households. Eliminating CAT-L would increase the burden on states while providing no additional resources for the extra paperwork and personnel. It's just another unfunded mandate for the states. It seems Republicans only like to promise states' rights when it means cutting off access to benefits and weakening the social safety net. At the same time, the administration is working to restrict states' use of CAT-L. USDA issued guidance encouraging SNAP states to adopt flexibilities to pursue child support orders, a widely unpopular and sparsely used state option with high associated administrative costs. The party of states' rights seems more interested in a one-size-fits-all approach based solely on conservative ideology. They continue to criticize the program from on high. They talk about the dignity of work and the cycle of poverty using pseudo-academic data from armchair think tanks. And they ignore already strict work requirements in statute to paint a dishonest picture of greedy, shiftless welfare sponges. At every turn, Republicans invoke the welfare reform of President Bill Clinton in the 1990s. Well, we've got news for you. It was Clinton and then Speaker Newt Gingrich who established CAT-L as the law of the land, a bipartisan, state-centered approach. The administration's FY 2020 budget forewarned us of potential changes to CAT-L, so it is no surprise that there is a related pending rule in USDA's regulatory agenda. Now here we are again, with my Republican colleagues looking to the White House to accomplish what they could not: dramatically change CAT-L. Again, I ask, what do congressional Republicans and this administration have against poor people? I've asked that question in past hearings on this issue across multiple Congresses. I am willing and eager to engage my Republican colleagues in a conversation about how to make this program more effective and accessible to hungry Americans, so long as that conversation does not start with the same tired attempts to reduce the SNAP rolls. That's not a conversation that I am willing to have. I now recognize Ranking Member Johnson for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate the opportunity for us to have a hearing on a loophole within this SNAP, within this food stamp program that is desperately in need of improvement. There are times when broad-based categorical eligibility is, frankly, an embarrassment. There are times when it simply doesn't work, and I know we'll hear some comments. Hopefully we'll have some good discussion today about administrative efficiencies. I suspect we will hear some hyperbolic examples of how changes to this BBCE can have a decimating impact on school lunch programs. And I think what I try to keep in mind is that we do need to find a positive way forward, and that scare tactics, false advocacy, they don't hide the true issue here. And that is, there are times when overreaching eligibility for this program means that we are not targeting this program to our most needy friends and neighbors. We should make no doubt about it. We need the SNAP program, and we need it to be effective. So by law, of course, states must convey SNAP benefits to those who apply to other social safety net programs, and there are all kinds of instances where that makes sense. But through imperfect regulatory language, states are permitted additional administrative flexibilities, and some states have abused that flexibility. Let's take Vermont, for instance, where the receipt of a bookmark can provide eligibility for the SNAP program. So in those instances and in other states, eligibility can be granted via a line on an application, a pamphlet with information that isn't even relevant to the household receiving it, a brochure that is for a different program entirely, that program, again, doesn't qualify for. I'm looking right now at Mr. Rob Undersander. He's the Minnesota millionaire, and Mr. Undersander, welcome. This is a man with assets in the millions who is able to receive more than a nominal amount of SNAP benefit for months and months. And he didn't do this out of any kind of a dark heart. He did this to call attention to the fact that there are flaws in the system. And it is Minnesota's abuses of this administrative flexibility that has caused this problem. I want to make it very clear, the data suggests that Mr. Undersander is not alone. A report prepared for USDA found that most income-eligible households with financial resources exceeding the federal resource limit have more than $20,000 in countable assets. 1 in 5 had more than $100,000 in assets, including tens of thousands of households with more than $1 million in assets. Mr. Undersander is not alone. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not impugning his reputation. He didn't lie on any forms. He simply exposed the flaws of a failed system. It isn't his fault that we in D.C. haven't done our job. Receiving a check from our social safety net program should not be easier than applying for a job. And if millionaires can receive these benefits, as they have, this committee has work to do. So defenders of this regulatory flexibility claim it reduces administrative costs. And I worked in state government for 12 years. At times very involved in our welfare programs, and I just have not seen evidence, real evidence, that that is necessarily the case. In fact, most state administrative costs are because of program enrollment. The more folks you enroll, the higher your administrative costs. And so closing this loophole could reduce administrative costs by $660 million per year. And I think it's right that we ask the question here, what about the poor people? How do we help them? That is the goal of programs like this. And so I look at that $660 million through a really, I think, critically important lens, which is those dollars could be better deployed to meet the critical goals and mission of this program. I sit on the Education and Labor Committee, where just a few weeks ago, I think an incorrect nexus was discussed at length as it relates to this policy and school lunch. What we never heard at Ed and Labor is that even if the proposal were to alter the regulatory language regarding categorical eligibility, 99.9% of children receiving free and reduced lunch would still remain eligible. We need to remember that the National School Lunch Program doesn't base its eligibility on SNAP. It has its own eligibility requirements, and that children who qualify will still receive these benefits. Lastly, proponents talk about administrative burden to the recipient, and I think that's a legitimate concern we can probably find a lot of bipartisan ground to address. And so I just want to ask on the record for my colleagues to host a hearing on technology. There are a variety of innovations used today across other federal and state programs that can significantly ease the application process and that shouldn't require any statutory manipulation. In that way, I think we can help the most needy among us, and I think we should have that conversation. So I welcome the witnesses, Madam Chair, and I look forward to their testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. And let me just say that I challenge my colleagues to find any program that is perfect. I would be happy to hear of perfection in any program run by any state or the federal government or any city. And just let me know what that is. But I also am concerned about the fact that someone would intentionally try to take resources from people in need. Now, I've heard about this ridiculous millionaire stunt. Chairman Peterson and I talked this morning, and since he's in a Veterans Affairs hearing right now, I will share some of the facts that you need to know. When this story broke 2 years ago, the chairman called the office in Stearns County where the alleged millionaire, Mr. Undersander, enrolled in the program. Mr. Undersander told the caseworkers that he wanted to be famous for his crusade against SNAP. Mr. Undersander may be in this room, and if he is, I would like to just say this directly to him. You willfully and maliciously gamed the SNAP benefits. You, an alleged millionaire, used mischaracterizations of your finances to cheat the program. You took benefits meant for the very seniors in Minnesota you served through your volunteer work. And you did this all to continue the right-wing crusade against poor people. Now, we all know that CADL is a widely used option and exists to provide states flexibility and to save administrative costs. If I did everything I could to find a way to game something, I could do it. But what we expect is that people, decent people in this country, would do the right thing and try to help people as opposed to hurt them.
Madam Chair, I would ask, Mr. Undersander's got a different characterization of those events, and I would just ask unanimous consent to submit his opinion column from his local newspaper into the record so people can hear his side as well.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you. Ms. Conaway want to do an opening statement? I don't know. Mr. Conaway, do you wish to make an opening statement?
Just a couple of comments, Madam Chairman. Thank you for that opportunity. I appreciate that. States' rights were invoked as a part of our legitimate disagreement on how this works. I'm a flat-out 10th Amendment kind of guy as well, but these are federal resources that we're talking about, and the state should have restrictions on how those resources are deployed, and I don't think it's unreasonable that those restrictions make sense. And having an asset test ignored on SNAP is regrettable. I don't blame the governors. Don't blame the states. We've set up a system that allows them to draw federal resources into their state to help the poor and to help anybody. And so if I'm a governor and I've got an opportunity to bring federal dollars to my state, I'm going to move heaven and earth to make that happen. They're just operating within the rules and the law that we've set up. Our problem is us. We need to adjust it and make adjustments to these rules and the regulations in order that, you're right, scarce resources can, in fact, go to the folks who need them the most. And that's what we're all about. I would like to get into the record that when my colleague said that she would be willing to work with us, last year when we had this subject matter in front of the committee, she and her team chose to not offer one single amendment to the bill that we had up. You didn't offer an amendment to strike everything we did. You didn't offer an amendment to approve or fix it. You just sat and said no. And that's discouraging in and of itself to have an opportunity every 5 years when we engage on this issue. Your guys just didn't do it and didn't engage. And that's, I just want to get that one into the record as well. But I appreciate you having this hearing today. It's helpful for us to have these conversations about a really important program that we're all supportive of. We just want it to go better, and to invoke the idea that the program has to, that's not perfect, shouldn't get better, is a bit of an odd argument as well. So I appreciate you giving me a chance to say a couple of words, and I yield back.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. McGovern.
Just to clarify the record, yeah, it's true the Democrats didn't offer any amendments to the Farm Bill in large part because of the nutrition title. I was, at that time, the ranking Democrat on the Nutrition Subcommittee, and we were never consulted about the nutrition title. We don't even know where it was written. We don't even know where it came from. It came out of nowhere. It didn't reflect any of the hearings that we had. It was clear that it was just yet another part of this attack on poor people, and quite frankly, we were offended. And I am relieved that the final Farm Bill that reflected the negotiation between the House and Senate basically cut out all of this language that would have punished low-income people in this country. And let me just also say for the record, I think if somebody intentionally defrauds the federal government, they ought to go to jail. I yield back.
We really do need to get to our witnesses. Ms. Short?
Yes. The concepts with what we used to write the Farm Bill SNAP programs were shared with Chairman, then Ranking Member Peterson. We shared all of the language with him in February. The markup was in March. There was plenty of time for you guys to have read the documents. And Mr. Understander did not break the law. He simply abided by the rules that were in place. So he didn't defraud
He intentionally
anybody.
defrauded the federal government. That is, in my opinion,
Okay,
breaking the law.
but let me close this part of this conversation because we have witnesses waiting. You may have given the information to Mr. Peterson, but you swore him to not share it with us. We're going to now move to our witnesses. And let me introduce now our first witness, who is the Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, Mr. Mandela Barnes. Our second witness, Mr. John Davis, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Human Services. We will also hear from Ms. Lisa Davis, Senior Vice President, No Kid Hungry, of Share Our Strength. Our final witness is Ms. Elaine Waxman, Senior Fellow at the Urban Institute, Income and Benefits Policy. Mr. Barnes, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Johnson and other distinguished members of the committee, good afternoon. I am looking forward to a very productive conversation. Again, I'm Mandela Barnes, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Wisconsin. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss how restricting or eliminating categorical eligibility will not only put millions of families in danger of losing SNAP benefits and also increase their risk of food insecurity, but it would also add a costly burden in the states and impede on our right to provide the resources we deem crucial and necessary for our citizens to thrive. Like many of you here today, I was raised to believe that I could do anything and be anything I wanted to be if I worked hard enough. My mother was a school teacher, and she taught me the value of education. My father was an auto worker, and he taught me the value of hard work. After college, I chose to pursue a career in public service, and I found myself in a job where I helped others find employment. I was able to assist people of all ages in my community and help break down barriers to help them become contributing members of our society, and also work towards lifting themselves out of poverty. Now, ironically, I lost my job helping other people find jobs. And during the short time, I was unemployed, and even before that, I had my hours cut at that job, and I did receive a modest SNAP benefit. And that allowed me to be able to put food on the table instead of forcing myself to choose between groceries and paying the bills. I still have my SNAP card, my food share card, somewhere laying around at the house. I was gonna bring it today because it normally sits around to remind me that I was once in a position where I too needed assistance. And as I've traveled the state of Wisconsin as Lieutenant Governor, I've heard so many similar stories. I've been able to hear from families who are more at ease because they know that their elderly relatives' SNAP benefits will ensure that they have access to healthy food. I've also been able to meet with parents who are thankful that they're able to put dinner on the table each night because of their SNAP benefits. And I've heard from teachers and principals, and they tell me how important it is that free and reduced lunch and what that means for so many of their students in their schools and in their school districts. You see, in Wisconsin, we have a responsibility, like every other state, to make sure that opportunity exists in every part, every county, every zip code. That means ensuring that each and every person has access to nutritious food, whether it's in our largest cities, whether it's in our native communities, in our schools, or the most rural parts of our states. Broad-based categorical eligibility is a crucial component in ensuring that our state can provide the full set of services that struggling families need to lift themselves out of poverty. Categorical eligibility helps more than 25,000 families in Wisconsin. It helps them to put food on their table. These individuals, many whom are elderly or just families trying to make ends meet, these are people who will lose all of their benefits under the administration's proposed change. Now, I recently met with an aging group in my state, and one of their primary concerns were the barriers that many elderly face in getting nutritious food. We're talking about people who've done everything right their entire lives, people who've worked hard, people who've contributed to our society, and are valued and respected members of their communities. But their fixed incomes often create challenges in keeping their refrigerators and pantries stocked with healthy food. And the small benefit they receive goes a long way and ensures that our aging population remains healthy and that we're treating them with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. So reducing or eliminating broad-based categorical eligibility would also have profound impact on the health and well-being of our children. Roughly 24,000 children in our state will lose access to nutritious food under this proposed rule change. Also worsened is that these children also lose eligibility for free and reduced price breakfast and lunch at their schools, thereby creating an additional hardship for families and a cost to the school system. The consequences of going hungry as a child will have a lasting effect on a person's health, their education, and ultimately their future. In Wisconsin, we believe that what's best for our kids is what's best for our state. So we cannot afford to have 24,000 children go hungry in our state. So finally, many of the families who also qualify for SNAP through broad-based categorical eligibility are the working poor. They not only benefit from food assistance, but also from the additional job training or retraining provided to those eligible for SNAP. These services help lift families out of poverty. They're helping farmers, caregivers, and factory workers all across our state. These people are contributing members of our society, and they are taxpayers. But unfortunately, low wages and high expenses like childcare and rent are making it hard for them to make ends meet. Broad-based categorical eligibility provides needed relief for these families, and it promotes work. Eliminating it would have dangerous repercussions in Wisconsin, including added fiscal costs for our states and less flexibility. But most concerning is that reducing or eliminating broad-based categorical eligibility would impose a benefit cliff. So instead of making it harder for states to provide nutritional food to their residents, such as the proposed administration change would do, the federal government should be allowing states the flexibility to make decisions that are best for their state. Categorical eligibility allows states to build a safety net that supports work and fosters opportunity. And it is my responsibility as Lieutenant Governor to ensure that opportunity exists for all people in my state, for children, for the poor, for the hungry, for the working men and women, for the elderly, for those with different abilities, for everybody who's been left behind. And as respected leaders, we all have this responsibility. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you have now figured out the lighting system. I neglected to tell you about it.
Sorry.
It's not very difficult.
Yeah.
When the light is green, you begin. When the light turns yellow, it is time to start to close. You have 1 minute left.
Yes.
When the light turns red, your time is up, so please try to wrap up as quickly as you can.
I apologize.
No, you were perfect. You were perfect. Now, I'm not going to let them go over, but you were perfect. You are recognized, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member, Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member Johnson and all committee members. It's a privilege to be here today to talk to you guys. I'm humbled at the opportunity to get to speak into this particular situation. The Mississippi Department of Human Services is in a very unique position to create a new approach to human services and needs-based programs in our state. We recognize more than ever the need to work with families holistically rather than simply determining eligibility and waiting for self-sustainability. Our staff approaches an individual who walks in the MDHS office with the understanding that they're not asking for a handout, but in fact, they're asking for a hand up. MDHS has been collaborating with multiple state agencies. All of this came about specifically with the WIOA Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, kind of forced states to start looking at holistically the agencies working together to build a better Mississippi. We began in 2016 by focusing our efforts on 4 priorities that I'm going to describe. And we began by re-engineering our offices to offer a multi-generational collaborative approach. Those 4 areas were invest in children and families through workforce development and training, improve opportunities for individuals to make healthy, self-sustaining choices, increase department capacity and efficiencies, and then improve systems, because we recognize individuals are worth that, families are worth that. The priorities listed that I've listed was a mission for a more effective, efficient, and open government, Focusing on those priorities has allowed the state to realize that commonalities between social capital, health and well-being, economic supports, education, and training, which will ultimately allow the state to maximize its resource by eliminating duplications of services, but also never to be last again in anything, as we are always labeled. The first, investing in children and families, I think is important as we start talking about BBCE, broad-based categorical eligibility. MDHS success will be measured and has been measured by the success of the clients that are served by the agency. A family-centered, multi-generational approach has been developed to invest in early intervention programs that will improve life outcomes for children and families. MDHS is doing this through the support of early involvement in case decision-making and providing access to activities which lead to livable wages through higher education, including vocational and technical training. The MDHS approach continues to recognize the importance of the family unit as it relates to the overall success of each of the members in the household. MDHS has proven through the years that we're more proficient in determining eligibility timely, accurately, and efficiently. However, the mentality of simply moving individuals in and out must be replaced with an effort to move them to self-sustainability. Assisting individuals with a needs-based program is providing them with a supplemental or temporary support as they move to initial employment and beyond to greater employment. We understand it as being more important to not just get the first job, but the second job and the third job so that individuals can become who they want to be, not who I want them to be. The overarching goal has been to stabilize the households and then provide an opportunity for greater individual success for household members. Assisting the adult in finding employment is only the first step if children are also part of the home. MDHS case managers must also look back and see how the children may be assisted. Providing resources for the child to be exposed to training, counseling, mentoring, tutoring will provide stability for current and the future healthy choices. Partners for success in workforce development. We have partners in multiple state agencies. The Employment Security Office, which is our Department of Labor in the state, has now taken on some of the responsibility of helping us to move these individuals through the process to employment. They have helped us with 5,800 cases on the TANF side, a little more than 253,000 cases on the SNAP side. That provides an individual with a subject matter expert on how to actually find a job that they want, that they can be successful in, rather than our office, our eligibility staff being responsible for helping that individual find the job. The Mississippi Board of Community College and Junior Colleges has been a critical partner in our efforts. The Institutions for Higher Learning, which is our university system in the state, has also been critical. We also understand this with broad-based categorical eligibility. By simply saying that we do not have that in our state, which July 1 begins, we will not have BBCE in the state of Mississippi. But we know that it takes investment in our staff through things like Law of 16, which is our personal and professional development programs for our staff members, to then replicate that over with our clients to make sure that they're empowered to be whom they have been called to be. So BBC alone is not necessarily for the state of Mississippi the answer for individuals to become successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you here today to discuss broad-based categorical eligibility and how it strengthens SNAP's ability to help working poor families with children. My name is Lisa Davis, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Share Our Strength's No Kid Hungry campaign. Share Our Strength's mission is to end hunger in the United States and abroad, and through our No Kid Hungry campaign, we help connect children and families who are living in poverty with the federal nutrition programs for which they're eligible, and we advocate to strengthen policies to end hunger. First, I want to note that broad-based categorical eligibility is an effective and a practical policy that helps low-income working families move out of poverty and build financial security, which is a goal I think we all would support. I urge you to continue to oppose efforts to restrict or eliminate it. SNAP is by anyone's definition our nation's most successful child nutrition program. A robust body of research reinforces its positive impact. It reduces food insecurity and deep poverty. It improves children's health, their education outcomes, and even their lifetime earnings. Indeed, SNAP is an investment with an ROI that any corporate executive would envy. The 3 points that I want to get across today about broad-based categorical eligibility are: 1, it primarily benefits working poor families with high living expenses. It is not an automatic pathway to SNAP benefits, contrary to what you may hear. And finally, it has a marginal impact on SNAP caseloads and benefit costs. By allowing states to align their eligibility and asset tests for SNAP with TANF, it strengthens the ability of low-income working families to get benefits from SNAP, which helps eliminate and ease a benefit cliff, so that if they suddenly are making just a few dollars over 130% of poverty, they don't abruptly lose benefits. It helps them build assets to weather an unexpected financial storm. And 9 out of every $10 that go out in SNAP benefits through BBCE go to households with earned income. So this benefits people who are working. Let me give you an example. A single mother with 2 children who works full-time and earns $12.50 an hour has an income at about 125% of poverty and could receive about $161 a month in SNAP. Without broad-based categorical eligibility, if her wages increased by only 50 cents an hour, her income would put her above 130% of poverty, her family would lose SNAP benefits, and be about $75 a month worse off in net assets. So my second point, well, broad-based categorical eligibility conveys eligibility to families and households whose gross incomes are over 130% of poverty. It is not an automatic pathway. These families still have to go through the regular SNAP application process with its rigorous procedures for documenting income and circumstances. Families can be categorically eligible for SNAP but not receive a benefit because their net income after deductions is simply too high. Finally, it has a marginal impact on SNAP costs. In a study earlier this year, the Congressional Research Service determined that only 4.2% of SNAP households have gross income before deductions within that broad-based categorical eligibility range of 131% of poverty to 200% of poverty. And studies show that only 0.2% of benefits go to households with net incomes above the poverty line. In a nation where 12 million of our children are living in food-insecure households, broad-based categorical eligibility is a critical support to helping their families connect with SNAP benefits for food at home and for getting them enrolled in free school meals. That access to free school meals is particularly important. As Congressman Johnson noted, many kids who might lose free meals through categorical eligibility being eliminated could still get reduced price meals. But those limited costs are really burdensome for families that are trying to balance housing costs that take up 50% of their income, childcare costs that can run up to $1,000 a month, and work their way out of poverty. So finally, I would like to leave you with one final thought. Broad-based categorical eligibility is working exactly as intended. It encourages and supports work, and it helps low-income families build financial stability and move towards self-sufficiency. These are goals that we should all support. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Waxman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Fudge, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and share insights from my research on food insecurity and access to SNAP. I'm a senior fellow at the Urban Institute, but the views expressed in this testimony are my own and should not be attributed to the Urban Institute, its trustees, or funders. Despite an improving economy, food insecurity persists at high levels across the U.S., affecting approximately 40 million people. In 2018, a National Urban Institute survey found nearly 4 in 10 non-elderly adults reported that their families experienced material hardship, such as trouble paying for housing, utilities, food, or medical care. SNAP is a critical resource for many families across the U.S., although the number of families receiving SNAP benefits has continued to decline as the economy improves. 36.3 million people participate in the program. Research shows that SNAP does exactly what Congress intended it to do. It decreases food insecurity. SNAP reduces the prevalence of food insecurity by 5 to 10 percentage points, including among households with children. Moreover, SNAP is effective in reducing poverty. Urban research shows that the program lifted 8.4 million people from poverty in 2015, and poverty among children decreased by 28%. These data are important to keep in mind when we think about policy changes that might reduce the number of families participating in SNAP. Fewer families on SNAP might translate into greater levels of food insecurity and poverty. I have been researching challenges facing low-income families for the last 2 decades, with a particular focus on food insecurity, family coping strategies, and federal nutrition programs. BBCE enjoys widespread support across urban and rural states and among states with more or less conservative approaches to safety net programs. Briefly, here is what the research tells us. First, the vast majority of households reached through BBCE are already income eligible and reflect important populations we need to assist, such as families who may have slightly higher incomes and assets and very significant expenses, like high housing costs in excess of 50% of income, medical out-of-pocket expenses, and childcare that allows them to work. Data indicate from the most detailed study we have that only 3.1% of all SNAP households and 3.4% of all SNAP participants would not meet income guidelines if non-cash BBCE were eliminated. These households received less than 1% of SNAP benefits. Second, although this population is relatively small, they have important characteristics. They are more likely than other SNAP participating households to have children, have earned income, have higher income, and receive very low benefits. It is important to be assertive in reducing food insecurity for all types of families because it is reducing food insecurity that we address health risks at every stage in the life course. But we particularly worry about food insecure households with kids and adolescents. Food insecure households with children have higher rates of fear and poor health, have higher rates of hospitalization, children have increased risks of asthma, and delays in cognitive development. Adolescents who are food insecure are at greater risk for depression and other mental health problems and are more likely to experience suicidal ideation. Therefore, the ability to reach vulnerable children and adolescents is one of the strengths of BBCE. Third, BBCE supports work among those who are able to do so because it helps families who may experience what is referred to as the benefit cliff as their earnings increase. By permitting states to raise the gross income limits above 130%, BBCE can help mitigate the risk that families who are working hard may be less well off as earnings increase. Nearly 1 in 5 households who are food insecure actually have incomes between 130 and 185% of the federal poverty level. Many of these individuals live in households where there are simply not sufficient earnings to keep pace with family needs and where the cost of living puts significant pressure on family budgets. Finally, research shows that low assets are a significant contributing factor to food insecurity. There has been broad bipartisan recognition that assets can buffer income shocks and that vehicles can be essential for maintaining employment, accessing healthcare, and securing food, especially in rural areas. A recent urban study found that relaxing or eliminating SNAP asset limits through BBCE increases the number of low-income households who have a bank account and at least $500 available for unexpected expenses. These findings suggest that reinstating federal asset limits would harm family financial stability. In summary, I thank the committee for the opportunity to share research evidence on SNAP. Our quick tour here suggests that eliminating or significantly restricting BBCE could undermine several key goals. 1, to reduce food insecurity. 2, to encourage work and increased earnings. 3, to permit the building of basic assets that can help buffer income shocks and reduce disparities. And 4, to minimize the burden on states as they prioritize limited resources. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you all very much for your testimony, and we will begin with our questions. Members will be recognized for questioning in the order of seniority for members who were here at the beginning of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. And I know that we may be coming close to votes within the next 45 minutes or so, so I'm going to now yield to Mr. McGovern for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And let me first of all say that this notion that somehow people are clamoring to be poor enough to be eligible for SNAP is laughable. Just for the record, so people understand this, the average SNAP benefit is about $1.40 per person per meal. You can't even buy a cup of coffee for that. And yet, we should be talking about how you expand that benefit, and instead, we're talking about how we could throw people off of the benefit. And I just find that to be terribly discouraging, especially knowing the fact that there are close to 40 million people in this country who don't know where the next meal is going to come from. If you want to talk about, defrauding the federal government, we ought to take a good look at defense contractors and all the cost overruns. We ought to look at corporations who don't pay any taxes, who exploit loopholes, or who intentionally deceive the federal government about what they owe, or look at the pharmaceutical companies who are ripping off consumers every single day. But instead, we hear from my friends on the other side of the aisle, that the real culprits are poor people in this country. Ms. Davis, in your testimony, you list examples in Iowa and Florida where income limits are described as, quote, not enough to meet a family's basic needs. And that's which is where SNAP comes into play, an important role. Massachusetts, where I'm from, is at 200% of the federal poverty line and is also known to have higher costs of living than a lot of other states in this country. What do you believe the impact would be in states like mine if broad-based categorical eligibility were to go away? And I also want to get back to the point that Mr. Johnson raised about kind of saying, everybody be happy, don't worry about kids losing their school, free school breakfasts and lunches. I wonder if you could talk about what the impact on that would be, and also the fact that reduced lunches and breakfasts, if you have multiple kids in a school at the same time, actually add up to quite a lot of money.
Right. Thank you, Congressman, for your question. Let me say first that eliminating broad-based categorical eligibility is a policy that is penny-wise and pound-foolish. The result would be short-term savings, but long-term costs in terms of increased medical costs, poor educational outcomes, and for many of the kids who would be impacted, less of a chance to move to better economic stability and opportunity. We look at the challenges facing low-income families, and in my role, I speak to many of them across the country. I have yet to meet a mom or dad that doesn't want to work. In fact, most of those that I meet are working, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs. The challenge for many of them is that the costs that they're paying for housing, for transportation, childcare, the growth outpaces their incomes. And so one of the benefits of broad-based categorical eligibility is it eases that cliff when families start to make a little bit more. And I think that is an important policy that incentivizes work and helps provide a pathway out of poverty. In Massachusetts, in New York, in Montana, where I'm from, housing costs are very significant and often consume more than 50% of a family's income. And so I think as a nation, instead of continuing to argue about whether poor people want to work or not, they do, there's evidence of that, we need to be thinking about how we can do what Mr. Davis is doing in Mississippi and craft supports that make it easier for them to work and to work up and to meet their transportation, housing, and childcare needs. And that's the conversation we ought to be having.
I appreciate that, and you point out another important fact, and that is the vast majority of people who are able to work, who are on SNAP, actually do work. Talk to me a little about the school breakfast and lunch issue.
Right. I think there is a very significant body of research that shows the impact that children getting the nutrition that they need has on things like school performance. And in many school districts, on days that they're testing, they will bring in breakfast, And I know my own kids, we get a call the night before reminding me to feed them too, because they recognize that correlation. Those meals are really important to making sure that kids can be present, that they can learn, and that they can perform. And getting enough nutrition, whether through SNAP at home or school meals, helps make sure that kids have better short and long-term health care outcomes and that they have higher lifetime earnings. And so it's really important that we look at all of these programs to make sure that every child in this nation, no matter his or her circumstances, can get 3 meals a day. Because of the way that SNAP interacts with school meals, if a child's family receives SNAP, he or she is automatically directly certified for free school meals. If broad-based categorical eligibility were eliminated, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that about 265,000 kids would lose that automatic free eligibility. Some of them may be eligible for reduced meals, but as you pointed out, even though those sums seem really insignificant to us, $25 to $30 a month is a lot to a family that doesn't have enough resources to meet all of their needs as it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ranking Member Johnson, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. Mr. Barnes, you talked about 24,000 students who might lose school meals or who would lose school meals coming from struggling families. My assumption, and so I want to give you an opportunity to push back if it's wrong, is that the vast majority of those families would not have substantial savings or other financial assets. Does that sound about right?
That can be concluded.
Yeah. So, do we have any idea how many of those 24,000 students come from families that are above 130% of the federal poverty line?
I don't have the number, but I can get that to you.
Do we have any idea how many of them would be more than 185% above the federal poverty line?
Same response. I don't have that exact number, but I can get that to you.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to bring to the fore here is that if your state is like the rest of our country, 99.9% of those kids will continue to qualify through the eligibility standards of free and reduced school lunch program for free and reduced school lunches. And in fact, 97% of them would continue to qualify for free school lunches. So this is perhaps not the doomsday scenario that some may be concerned about.
Well, if they end up losing their SNAP benefit, then school lunch may be the only meal that they get to have in a day.
Well, and absolutely, they should have that school lunch. 99% of them will continue to qualify or be eligible for that program. Now, there may be an additional bit of paperwork. My family, certainly growing up, I was on free and reduced school lunches for the entirety of my K-12 experience. And I have seen that paperwork, and I understand what that means for a family to sit down and fill it out. But 99% of kids would continue to qualify. I just want to make sure that comes to the fore. I also want to make sure that we talk a little bit about, there's been some allegation that there's great cynicism or distrust on this side of the dais. But, let's be honest. We all know that most people are really honest and that some people, a minority, will take advantage of any program, of any system. That's why we use income tests, right? Nobody here is advocating to get rid of income tests because we realize we want the integrity of a system that targets assistance for the people who need it. Let's be honest. We have audit functions for income taxes, for property taxes. We want to make sure that we don't just trust people to pay their fair share, but that rather we have a system that gives us confidence in the integrity of those tax systems. And I just want to say to the gentleman from Massachusetts that I am interested in working with you to root out waste, fraud, and abuse wherever it is. And I have sponsored legislation that would improve defense acquisition, because I agree, that's not a perfect system. And I have supported legislation that would drive down pharmaceutical costs, because I agree with you, that system is not perfect. And I am interested in making sure that tax cheats and tax frauds do time in jail if they are guilty. And so in the same way that we want to find accountability and integrity in those areas, it only makes sense that we should try to find it in our social safety net programs as well. They are too important for us to not have faith that they are helping the families who most need that assistance. Now, there are allegations seemingly every day on the floor of the House that my party doesn't authentically care about poor people, and as somebody who grew up poor, I always find that a little hard to stomach. And so, Mr. Davis, I want to give you an opportunity to tell us, why did you get into your line of work? Why do you show up every day? And what is the motivation in your heart, sir, for the reforms that your state is making?
Human Services has been my business all my life. Actually, I've been with the department for 28 years. And I started as a social worker, was an eligibility worker, so on and so forth. What I recognize is that helping people to become eligible for a program is one thing. To help an individual to find self-sustainability and what they want to do in life, instead of me telling them what to do, means a whole lot more. The BBCE issue certainly is important, but it is certainly just a symptom of a bigger issue. If we truly want to help people, we need to be about helping the person and the family as a whole. And so that's what motivates me every day, sir, to make sure that we, as an agency in a state that's the poorest in the nation, who has a lot of people who are eligible for the program, to make sure that I give them a hand up and not just the handout.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask the ranking member if he could provide us with the data or the information that says to us that 99% of all of these children would still qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Yes, absolutely. We will make sure to provide that to the staff for entry into the record.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I agree that I think most people are honest, except for the person that you praised when we started this hearing, Mr. Undersander. Sir, I have to move on, so.
Madam
I know
Chair.
you want to respond.
No, I just want one sentence, ma'am. This gentleman told the truth. He didn't commit a single act of fraud. All he did was tell the truth in the application. It's the application that was flawed, not his answers.
Ms. Adams, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Ranking Member Johnson for holding today's hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony. In December, the President signed into law a bipartisan farm bill, which many of us here helped to negotiate in good faith. Months went into refining the language and coming to an agreement which received historic support in both chambers, yet the administration is again threatening to circumvent congressional intent. This time to roll back categorical eligibility and to take food assistance away from children, families, veterans, disabled, and older Americans. My state of North Carolina uses the flexibility of broad-based categorical eligibility to ensure they're reaching those who need help the most. More than 98,000 North Carolinians and 35,000 children would lose food assistance, including school meals for children, if this flexibility is eliminated. In Mecklenburg County, where my district is, more than 10,000 people, including 47,000 children, would lose access to benefits. These are mostly working families with high child care costs or housing costs and seniors, and that is not acceptable. Ms. Davis, as a mother, a grandmother, and teacher for 40 years, I'm concerned with the effects that this change would have on our nation's children, and I'm strongly opposed to a similar change in the Farm Bill because according to the Congressional Budget Office, it would take school meals away from 265,000 children nationwide. Based on my state's data, it would take meals away from 35,000 children in North Carolina, and almost 5,000 of those are in my county. So can you speak to the importance of SNAP and school meals for children and their families, including how food assistance programs contribute to long-term health and financial well-being?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. Ensuring that all of our nation's children, no matter what their circumstance, have the opportunity to reach their full potential is one of our most fundamental values. And when we look at the research on SNAP and school meals, both breakfast and lunch, what we find is that they improve children's short and long-term physical and mental health, for younger children, brain development. Children who are not experiencing food insecurity are less likely to be hospitalized. They have better healthcare outcomes. And other studies show that all of this and the education impacts of kids being disciplined less frequently, having better school attendance, performing better on tests, leads to an 18% increase in their likelihood of graduation and leads to increases in lifetime earnings as well. I think the health impacts of SNAP and of school meal programs on kids are very well documented, and some studies show that there are medical cost savings of $1,500 to $2,500 a year for folks who are no longer food insecure.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor Barnes, I'm concerned as well about the unnecessary administrative burdens that this potential rule would impose. As Lieutenant Governor, you're involved directly with the state and local agencies that would would be saddled with the increased paperwork and duplicative processing that would result. So could you outline difficulties that eliminating this eligibility would cause for administrators, including the increased need to verify assets?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's one of the things that comes up a lot is, how often do we need to replicate government functions? If we can just do it in one fell swoop, if we can make sure that children are taken care of, and with one application process versus another, why create more bureaucracy? To use an argument that would support your line of thinking on this side of the aisle. And as well, I want to clarify, too, about the children, because you said 99.9%. I would be so bold as to say 100% of children don't get to decide the financial stability of their own household. With that being said, if they do lose SNAP benefits but still have free or reduced lunch, again, is it fair to those students to only have access to food for breakfast and lunch at school but not in the home? And when it comes to the topic of, again, more applications, like think about how much time that cuts out from a family that a person needs to go find a job. If a parent has to fill out more and more applications, has to go to a county building to try to register for benefits, that cuts out on productivity, time where they could be searching for a job or actually working.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Conway, the ranking member of the full committee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. I appreciate our witness's testimony, much of which supports the idea that we should, in fact, have a SNAP program, and we all agree with that. But that's not really what we're talking about this morning. We have a SNAP program. It's important, and we're going to keep it. The issue is how do we administer that program that's fair to the folks who need the benefits and is also fair to the taxpayers. And so I guess the question would be, should we have an asset test? Is there any real reason to have that? I think there is. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle were offended by a fellow who had well beyond the asset test, but still qualified under this categorical, broad-based categorical deal. So if we have an asset test, why would we not update the way outdated levels of assets that were in current in law, update those to 2019, and then actually enforce that asset test? So it's not a matter of taking the benefits away from folks who meet the requirements. It's making sure that those scarce resources go to the ones who need it the most. So, Mr. Davis, should in fact we have an asset test, and should that asset test be enforced, and should it be verified at the port of application?
I agree that we should have an asset test, and the reason being because that allows our staff, who are more than just eligibility staff. You have to remember, if we're looking at families holistically, we should be more like navigators, helping individuals to get to the resources that they're eligible for on the front end so that they won't need us on the back end when they become successful. The asset test could be an opportunity for us to dig a little bit deeper into helping that individual find that sustainability and self-sufficiency, or that family as a whole do that, using our Families First Resource Centers, using our staff to help to understand if they do have resources, how in fact can we build on those resources? How in fact can we build on that income? How can we help them find a livable wage? So it allows our staff to work closely with that individual to help them through the process.
So as a part of those assets that a family has, would it be appropriate to exclude from the asset test some level of liquid assets, cash, that would allow that family to buffer the normal ins and outs of what goes on in a family, and exclude those assets from that asset test? Would that be handy?
We had an incident in Mississippi. We had the Gulf oil spill in 2008, and then we did away with the waiver for BBCE, and then we brought it in, and so we had individuals who were fishermen and worked in canneries who had saved money all of their career, and then didn't have a job. And we felt that would allow them, by doing away with, by allowing BBC, that would allow them to come onto the programs. One of the things that we failed to do, though, once we help them become eligible for that program through disallowing those resources, we forgot that these individuals needed help in bigger ways. They had bigger barriers than just having too many resources. They needed help and assistance in finding other jobs, finding personal and professional development opportunities, helping them to be empowered to become who they want to be. If they can't be fishermen, if they can't work in a cannery, it goes across the board, though, in any job opportunities that we as an agency have to work with an individual, finding through sector strategies those opportunities for livable wage jobs, as I keep saying.
Well, Mr. Davis, you remarkably described a process that was included in the House version of the version of the SNAP program, part of the Farm Bill that came out of this committee, sought to spend significant resources to the states to allow them to do just that very thing. Whether it's the income test or the asset test, each, Mr. Davis and Mr. Waxman and Governor Barnes all talked about families who got just above the 130 or whatever that number is. Rather than relying on a loophole and exploiting a loophole, would it be better to have a fulsome conversation about what the number should be? Is it 130 the right number? Is 150 the right number? Is 200 the right number? Let's have those kind of conversations as opposed to defending a loophole that allows some families in America to be treated differently than a family in another state in exactly the same circumstances is being treated. How is it fair for folks in Massachusetts to make 200% of poverty and folks in Texas make only 160? So I would think that having conversations about the specifics of the test, if those are bad, if those are wrong, let's have that conversation. But let's quit talking about constantly exploiting loopholes. Mr. McGovern hates loopholes for the tax side. Let's quit exploiting loopholes as a public policy in this regard. So, Madam Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Schreier, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to just thank our witnesses for being here today. I think this is such an important topic of categorical eligibility and making sure that families who are already on the edge and in need don't have additional hoops to jump through in order to make sure that families and children get food, again, $1.40 per person per meal. Then this conversation turned to a conversation about loopholes, and I feel now pulled into this conversation and eager to address it because there are loopholes in a lot of places, and I think that we need to decide which ones to address based on a benefit and risk ratio. And so I challenge some of my colleagues who are so reluctant to close loopholes in a tax code that gives tremendous benefit to the wealthiest and to corporations. And frankly, if we just closed a couple of those loopholes, we would have no problem finding $1.40 per meal for our kids or for school lunches. And then there's this other group of loopholes that we talk about a lot, which is the loopholes in purchasing a weapon. And on that one, I would say, what is the cost? If you don't close those loopholes, then people can get hold of a gun who could do our children harm or do themselves harm. And so then if we talk about the cost of closing those loopholes, if you do close those loopholes and it becomes more difficult to get a gun, for example, the cost is only a couple more days of waiting, but the benefit could be saved lives. The cost to a taxpayer is simply that they pay a fair share of taxes. But in this case, the cost of closing the so-called loophole, which isn't really even a loophole, this is just eliminating paperwork, we already know because we heard in this committee that the fraud rate in this program is less than 1%. The cost of that is that kids and low-income working families may not get the food that they need in school, at home, or over the summer. And so I thought I would paint a picture of this in Washington State. Broad-based categorical eligibility helps more than 38,000 families in Washington meet eligibility requirements for SNAP. And these provide assistance for children and adults to access nutritious foods. And we might talk about that in a minute on the difference between nutritious and non-nutritious foods. Washington State Department of Social and Health Services conducted an analysis in 2019 that found that lowering the SNAP income limit from 200% to 130% of the federal poverty level would eliminate SNAP benefits for approximately 67,000 low-income working individuals. So by eliminating that, over 17,000 Washington students would no longer qualify for free school meals. And then there would be additional funding lost from the National School Breakfast Program. And with that, with fewer students participating in free school meals, fewer schools would be able to offer other nutrition programs like the Summer Meals Program, which is available in communities where more than 50% of the student population qualifies for free or reduced price meals. And so I wanted to just put that clarity on. And then Lieutenant Governor Barnes, I just was wondering, and thank you for your testimony, if you could comment on the negative impact Wisconsin schools would face if they lost a sizable amount of annual funding dedicated to a school meals program.
Our schools and thank you, our schools in Wisconsin are already significantly burdened from funding issues of the previous administration. So it is our goal to place as few burdens on them as possible. And this is one area where we can make a difference. I think we should do it. And back to the loopholes conversation. We want to close as many loopholes as possible. I get it. I'm with everybody on that part of the conversation. There's no perfect system. If there was, poverty wouldn't even be an issue. We wouldn't be having this conversation. But when it comes to schools and children, I think the biggest loss is not just in dollars and cents. It's in student productivity. It's about students who are showing up to school on an empty stomach, who are having a hard time learning, end up having all sorts of behavioral issues, miss time out in school, end up suspended, whatever the case may be. And it also creates barriers to success for them in future life. If they have trouble learning, if they find themselves having to be disciplined for, as a result of poverty, just to put it very plainly. And I think that is the most important cost that we need to think about, not just dollars and cents. And that also has a long-term cost because too many of these children who are living in poverty, who have food insecurity, unfortunately, those are the same students that we see ended up in our criminal justice system.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more super quick question that might turn into an observation. 43 states have chosen to do broad-based categorical eligibility. That means that very few others have not. Mississippi is one of them. I know as a pediatrician that food insecurity and hunger does lead to later obesity, and I just wanted, if you have a moment, to comment on obesity rates in Mississippi and whether that might be tied to your state's decision to limit access to school nutrition programs and SNAP categorical eligibility.
We understand that it is more important for good choices, making healthy choices, helping the family holistically. When we talk about BBCE or the elimination thereof in the state of Mississippi, we too believe that it is our job as state workers, as employees of the Department of Human Services, to work closely with that family to eliminate the barriers that have caused them to be eligible for the program to begin with.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I hate to interrupt
I'm sorry.
you, but the gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Bacon, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your organizing this today, and I appreciate the testimony. It's been a good learning experience. First, I just, being new to hearing about Mr. Undersander, I think as a minimum, hearing about his situation and the case, it just shows that there is a need for clearer standards. And I think it's all right to say we want to review those standards to make sure the taxpayers are being protected while we're providing a quality safety net. So I just think it's worthy. I think it's just an example that taxpayers do want to have assurance that their money's being spent right while we're guaranteeing a safety net. So, hearing about his case, I think it's helpful. And also some of the comments made earlier, I find some more straw man arguments because no one on either side of the aisle here said people are clamoring for SNAP. So sometimes there's words put in other people's mouth that were never said. And no one here is anti-poor. We just want to ensure that we have a quality safety net that works and that also protects the taxpayers. And as the ranking member said earlier, we all support it. We all support SNAP, and a safety net program is vital. I think our nation, we believe in hard work. We like competition because it makes for a better society, and a system of free markets work. It's lifted more people out of poverty than any other system ever made. However, a humane society has a safety net, and so the two things I get from this is that just hearing the discussion today, it's all right to review. Are we making this as safe for the taxpayer, an effective program as possible? But two, how do we help reform the system that helps people get out of poverty? And one of the things we tried to work on last Congress was how do we provide skill sets that align people to better paying jobs to help them get out of poverty, to give them a trade, to teach them a skill, because we have a record employment numbers today, a record low unemployment. There's a high demand for jobs, particularly in Nebraska. And we just want to help align people to this work because we think that's the best way to get them out of poverty. So with that, I'd just like to ask maybe my first question, Mr. Davis. Tell us a little more about your philosophy. How are you trying to reform the system to get people with these skill sets so they become independent and out of poverty? I mean, I've heard some general philosophy. Can you give us a little more tangible information?
Absolutely. We partnered closely with most of the state agencies in Mississippi as Human Services. We recognized it was a bigger job than just for Human Services to help individuals truly to be successful. We partnered with each of the state agencies, came together, determined a plan of action, and then we recognized too as Human Services, this was bigger than just on the state level. We had to give or empower the communities to own this. We did that by creating or expanding our Families First Resource Centers, which now are in every county of the state of Mississippi, helping individuals to find those things, those barriers that are in their lives, to help try to eliminate those barriers so that it's not just about their bank account, it's not just about their income, it's about any other issue that's going on in that home. We're finding generationally that there is not good models sometimes of what it looks like to be successful. And so we're trying to ensure that we look and work closely on the community level. So partnerships, collaboration, connecting the dots for individuals. I'm an advocate for SNAP benefits. I'm an advocate for the TANF program. I believe that there's an opportunity to help people help themselves. I too recognize after all of these years, from being a caseworker to now being executive director for the past 4 years, I understand the need to empower people, to help them to know that they can do more than what we can determine eligibility for, that we can give them that empowerment through professional and personal opportunities, workforce development. So tying those individuals to opportunities in the workforce development area.
Lieutenant Governor Barnes, I also appreciate your testimony earlier. Are there any reforms that you think we're missing to help folks get the skill sets to become independent? Are there things that we could be doing that we've not talked about from your vantage point?
Well, I guess we can start by saying the minimum wage hasn't gone up in 10 years. That will help lift people directly out of poverty. Poverty is on the rise in Milwaukee, in the state of Wisconsin. We're at 12.3%. Almost 17% of children. African-American rate of poverty is 44% in Wisconsin. African-American children, Native American children is 41%. And job training is great. I'm all for job training programs. But unfortunately, those job training programs don't always lead to living wage job placements. I think that's where we are missing the mark, and the more we can encourage our employers to pay a decent living wage to people, it would encourage work. Because right now, even if you look at the benefit clips that would be created with removing the categorical eligibility, it would incentivize people to work less if they had a chance to make an extra 50 cents an hour, because they would be just over the limit and they would no longer be eligible for the benefits and end up at a net loss.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Van Drew. Mr. Lawson's gone. Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for having this today, and thank you all for being here and answering all these questions. First of all, I really want to say that I do believe that the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans don't want to hurt poor people. Sometimes when we get into these discussions, it gets so intense, and the next thing we know, and I know I'm digressing a little bit, we're starting to speak about other issues and other differences, but I do hope that there is a day that comes more and more that we're working together and accomplishing goals together, because I think there are many similarities in where we all want to go. There may be some differences, but I really do believe that. And for my part, I'm going to try to do everything I can to encourage that. And I want to thank you for being here, because, it's funny, New Jersey, which is my home state, is a wealthy state. And it's a state that people really assume doesn't have many of the problems that we all hear about today. But I have received estimates from the State Department of Human Services that we have 250,000 New Jersey households that receive SNAP under expanded categorical eligibility. So it's a big deal in New Jersey, and it's particularly a big deal in the part of New Jersey I come from, which is the southern part of the state, which is more rural and seashore, and many people only work part of the year and have tremendous challenges during the year. Lowest per capita income of any county in the state in our area. I have a lot of statistics that show there are a lot of issues. And the other issue that I really have concern is health and the healthfulness of people. And especially when it comes to the obesity rate of children, we have the highest obesity rate, again, in my part of the state. So I guess the question I would ask, and I kind of know the answer, but I just want to hear it, make sure I'm right. How does hunger impact overall outcomes for education, income, and health? And I guess I would ask Mrs. Davis that question.
Great. Thank you for your question. I think I have 3 points to make. First, on the educational front, children can't come to school hungry to learn if they're just plain hungry. We hear from teachers all across America about the difference that they see in their classroom from an educational performance standpoint, an attendance standpoint, and a behavioral standpoint when their kids are getting enough to eat. And studies show that at the end of the month, when we know that most families have run out of their SNAP benefits, kids do less well in school and there are more disciplinary actions. So ensuring 3 healthy meals a day, every day for kids has a tremendous impact on education. I think with health and obesity too, one of the many benefits of SNAP and getting kids on SNAP is that studies show that over a lifetime, they have a significantly lower chance of having metabolic disease, so obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease. And there are a lot of studies that show the correlation between obesity and food insecurity.
Yep, and that's what I wanted to ask about a little bit more. So do you believe we're doing a good enough job in the way the program works? And I know what the purpose of this hearing is, but it still is part of the SNAP issue, with ensuring that the food that they're getting, that they're eating, that they are getting 3 healthy meals a day.
I think that one of the biggest challenges is that SNAP benefits are simply too low. You've heard several people reference $1.40 per meal per day. There are other studies that show that for many families, the benefits run out by the 2nd or 3rd week of the month. And so I think we need to take a serious look at SNAP benefit adequacy. For meals that are provided, for school meals, they meet strict nutritional requirements, and that is very important for kids too. But what we see is it's that fundamental lack of consistent access to enough nutritious food that ends up impacting their health. Families who don't have enough resources may cope by buying less expensive, higher calorie food. We know that people's bodies and metabolisms respond and are permanently changed by cycles of feast and famine. And so I think the most important thing is to make sure that all kids in America have adequate access to enough nutritious food, and that starts with looking at SNAP benefit adequacy.
Yep, and I think that's both, that financially the dollars are there to make sure that they're able to get the proper food, but also to make sure that the educational aspect is there, that they get the proper food. And real quick, I know I got to go real fast, but I think so when we look at jobs, and that was part of the discussion here, I think we have lots and lots of jobs out there that people aren't being trained for. In the technical fields, in the fields of other areas, I know. I would love to talk about this, but I won't. But I wish that our county colleges and technical schools would work together even more to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Yoho, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't know where to start. I got so much stuff here. Mr. Barnes, you said SNAP has proven to be the singular most effective anti-hunger program in the country, helping more than 40 million people. My question is, why prior to the recession, when we had approximately 17 to 20 million people on SNAP, it increased to over 44 million, and now we're at full employment, higher wages across the board, yet we are still at about 39 million people. Excuse me? No problem. Mr. Barnes?
Yeah, no, actually, the 40 million figure didn't come from me, but...
Well, the point is, we're at full employment. We're at 17 to 20 million before the recession, went up to 40, 45 million. Now we're down to 39 to 40 million people. You know, if we're at full employment and higher wages, why are there so many people still on SNAP?
I got to push back on the higher wages piece.
Well, you need to come to Florida then.
I'm in Wisconsin.
Go ahead.
The wages haven't, like, the national trend is that wages have not kept up, first of all, with inflation, and second.
Well, we can talk about that. I think that's something that needs to be pointed out, because in my state, average wages are, you know, in my district, usually around $11 to $14 an hour.
Yeah.
Starting.
Matt's where your district is?
The best part of Florida, District 3. Let me move on to something, because you said something else. It must be noted that the categorical eligibility does not result in substantial SNAP benefits going to non-needy families and does not mean households automatically get SNAP. They must qualify for benefits. Do you have a number that says what substantial is? Because you said it's not substantial, the people that are not needy getting these.
Yeah, we're talking about a few rare occurrences, and again,
What percentage? What percentage of all that?
I can get that percentage back to you.
I would like for you to get that, because I think someone like Mr. Undersander, if he can show a flaw in this system, and this is what irritates me about Congress. It shouldn't be, this side says we're trying to take benefits away from poor people, and this side saying poor people are lazy. Nothing gets fixed. We should focus on what is best for the person that this program was designed for. And if somebody like Mr. Undersander can show a flaw in it, I would think us as members of Congress would come together and say, well, by God, if somebody's cheating the system and it's that easy, we should bring an end to this. And I think we would come together as Congress, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans, to fix the dang problem. And I think Mr. Undersander should be, he's a whistleblower that pointed something out. And we can talk about fraud in the food stamp program, because we've had a person come up here to show there's a minimum of $1 billion in food stamp fraud. USDA says there's $4 to $7 billion in food stamp fraud. And if we're really concerned about the integrity of this program, well, again, by God, we ought to be able to come together and fix that for the American people, because we're in charge of their money. Right. I want to move on to something, because I'm on a roll here.
Can I respond to that? Because with all due respect, if the percentage was so high, why are we using the same example over and over again?
Of what?
The guy in Minnesota.
Well,
if there's so many people, why are we using the same person over and over again as an example?
Because it's been brought up to my attention, but I can show you the fraud on the food stamp out of Jacksonville. In fact, we had that person up here, and we invited the ranking member to come to see the demonstration and the facts of people selling food stamps, EBT cards, 50 cents on the dollar, of millions of dollars in Jacksonville. Ms. Davis, I want to move on to, of the people that are on food stamps, on SNAP, of the 39 million people roughly on SNAP, your figure states that only 4.2% were the BBCE category. Is that correct?
4.2% have incomes between gross incomes between 131% of poverty.
But those are the ones on broad-based categorical, right? Eligibility is the way I understood
well,
that.
I think more people those are the people that wouldn't qualify, that would have eligibility conferred through broad-based categorical eligibility.
All right, but when I did the math, it equates to about $2.7 billion. So if we've got people that can qualify that shouldn't be on that, why don't we want to tighten that up?
I think one area that's often misunderstood is that the first step is looking at gross eligibility, and broad-based categorical eligibility raises that to between 131% and 200%.
The reforms we put in the last bill.
We still have to look at net income after deductions.
Well, the last farm bill that
have
Chairman Conaway tried to put through raised the assets somebody could have. Their car was $3,000, I think, in the old days. It went to over $12,000. They could have X amount of dollars in assets, and it got beat down in this committee, and it didn't pass, and it's unconscionable that members of Congress can't come together to fix a program, again, for the American people and the people that truly need it.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses that are here today. And I agree with my colleague on the other side that when we identify that someone is committing fraud or fundamentally shifting our institutions, that we should do something about it, and that's not a partisan issue. I want to walk you guys through an equation because we're talking about SNAP benefits. And I've been on the other side of those benefits, so being in this room and in this committee hearing is somewhat personal for me. First of all, the number of people receiving benefits goes up even though our employment rates are down because children don't work. If you have a family of 4, I'm going to talk about in my home state of Connecticut, the eligibility for a family of 4 is $3,870 a month. That's how much has to be earned. My guess is in that family, at least 2, possibly 3 of those people are children. So that breaks down to $967 a week. In my state, where minimum wage is $10.10, that if it's 2 adults, they're working, it's 95 hours a week, so one person is working 40 hours, another person is working 55 hours, but 95 hours a week at minimum wage in order to meet the threshold. I know this because I worked 3 jobs and still qualified for SNAP benefits because I fell under the threshold. Of that number, you would receive $642 a month in benefits, which breaks down to about $160 a week for a family of 4. That's $40 per person per week. A gallon of milk is $3.99 in my state, which means 10% of your per person weekly budget on SNAP would go to just buying a gallon of milk. Nobody's taking advantage of that. When you really look at it, that's what it means. I'm going to back up a little because I've been accused of being a single-issue person who only cares about children and education, and you're probably not wrong. But on the flip side of that, my grandmother, when we took care of her at home when she was suffering with Alzheimer's, received benefits. One person, elderly, $68 a month. A month. So when we're having a conversation about fraud and abuse and misuse, and a family of 4, which could potentially have 2, possibly 3 children, boiled down to $40 per person per week, and that's where we're looking to cut, so that's where something is fundamentally wrong and unconscionable. Ms. Davis, thank you so much for the work that you're doing with No Kid Hungry, because while we're here debating loopholes and eligibility and requirement, kids are going hungry. And they don't have time for us to sit around and play these partisan games. You know, these are programs that people depend on, and not as a handout, you know, but sometimes people just need them as a step up to get themselves started. I worked 3 jobs and still qualified for benefits. You know, and most of the children have no control over, like Mr. Mandela said, their families, Mr. Barnes said, their family finances. I know I didn't, but I digress. Because I get so worked up when I'm in these committees and I hear people, we're having conversations about kids who can't defend themselves, who just need for us to speak up for them until they can speak for themselves, to just need us to stand in intercession until they could stand. And I'm probably going to use my whole 5 minutes editorializing, but this is, I need for you to understand that we're having a hearing on something that is impacting people's lives right now. This is serious. Mr. Mandela, you talked about you not receiving benefits as a child, but then as an adult, and there are a lot of people who are in that situation as well. And if you could just talk to us a little bit about what that is, because it's not these generational shifts that people are talking about or this cyclical poverty. Sometimes people just fall on hard times.
Well, absolutely. And the last thing I wanted to do was to stay receiving those benefits. I was working a full-time job, and I finished college in 2008, quite possibly the worst time to ever finish college if you wanted a job. And I ended up getting one, and before I was laid off, my hours were cut out, maybe about 40%, which then put me in a category where I was ineligible for SNAP benefits, as well as everything else. I was energy assistance, whatever the case was. And ultimately, after I got laid off, I was on unemployment. And that was not a place that I wanted to be. The last thing I wanted to do was be unemployed as an adult, as a single adult. And so finding a job was tough in 2010. It was very difficult. And
So even within education and a work history?
With education and with work history. It's not easy.
Thank you. I knew that, but I just wanted to hear you say it.
Yep.
Please say hello to my friend, Tony Evers.
I will.
Thank you. Mr. Hagedorn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the hearing that you're holding. Thanks to the witnesses. One of the reasons I wanted to serve on the Agriculture Committee was twofold, to make sure that we can sustain our incredible system of agriculture that produces the finest quality, affordable products in all the world for the American people and for a lot of people around the world, and that the food supply is abundantly important. People go into the grocery store, they have an opportunity to select from this array of choices. It's an incredible thing, and I like to talk about and champion that every chance we get. It doesn't happen in every country around the world. But then there's the second part of the Ag Bill that's important, why I wanted to serve, the nutrition programs. The United States of America and our taxpayers are citizens and most generous people in all the world. We provide a safety net for folks to make sure that people, when they're down in their luck or for whatever reason, they need help, and we get them that help. But what we need to do is make sure we're good stewards of that money and that those resources are directed to the people that actually need the help. And if there are folks out there receiving benefits that shouldn't, those resources should be directed either back to the general fund of the Treasury or to the people that need it even more. And so I think that's what this hearing's about. We're talking about these issues. And we even had the chairman of the committee, Mr. Peterson, I guess in the previous Congress, and he brought that up. He's from my home state. I believe the gentleman that's here who kind of showed that there's maybe a problem with the system here and there, Mr. Undersander, he's from the state of Minnesota. And Mr. Peterson said, at one point, he said, we in Congress have created a system where states set the rules in some cases and then we are left paying the bills. And he's right, because the government, even though the federal government provides monies to the states get to administer the programs. And what's happened over the years, I think, is the programs have gotten a little bit out of whack. I think they're a little bit been liberalized in some areas that maybe is not helping everybody. But are there areas where we should tighten it up? Of course. Should we have a biometric E-Verify to make sure that illegal aliens are not collecting federal welfare dollars, which is against the law? Absolutely. Why do we want to send our taxpayer dollars there? Should we be doing everything we can to make sure people are not collecting in multiple states, which happens from time to time? There are people out there that try to exploit our systems. We want these resources to be directed to the people that need it. And then we have the case where this asset test, I guess, technically you can walk through, and Mr. Understander said, hey, I can collect. I don't think I should, but do something about it. All right, we should do something about it, and maybe as Mr. Barnes and others said, it doesn't affect every case, doesn't affect that many, but it shouldn't happen. I think we should all agree it shouldn't happen. But when you look at what's going on, and I used to work for a congressman that served on this committee in the 80s, Arlen Stanglin. He led the Republican Work for Welfare bill and Work Requirement bill back then. And that bill was fundamentally passed by President Clinton, who signed it, Newt Gingrich and the Republicans in Congress, some fair-minded Democrats who joined us on that, to increase the work standards and technical training and other requirements for people that collect welfare, including food stamps. That bill was very successful. Drove down the rates, saved costs. People got back into private sector and other work, and I think it was a good thing. But for many purposes, that legislation was undermined by the 2009 Stimulus Act and many of the Obama administration rules that allow waivers for states to basically ignore the work requirements. And so the USDA is working on that to try to tighten it up. I support them on that fundamentally and wholeheartedly, because in many instances, a lot of these asset tests and others maybe go out the wayside when you say to people, if you're collecting benefits and you're able-bodied, we need to either get in there and get some technical training so you can get into the workforce, have an upwardly mobile job, or work for your welfare the same way the taxpayers do and give incentive to try to get off the programs. But I'll tell you this, I think that the most compassionate thing that members of Congress can do is to say we need to take people from government dependence, welfare, and move them to technical training, move them to work, move them to self-sufficiency. That is the most compassionate thing we can ever do. And, the mandates for able-bodied citizens, it's common sense, I think. And every person in our society, every potential worker has worth and value, and we should never stymie their success and their upward mobility because of government programs, bad government, even in the name of compassion. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Davis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to to be here. Sorry I was a little late today. As you know, the great convenience of serving on multiple committees. So thank you for your patience, and thank you to the witnesses. I will let the witnesses know that although there are two Davises on the panel, I don't believe we're related. If we are, if it's shown up in year 23andMe, let me know. Hey, this is a great opportunity to discuss, where the future of our SNAP program and categorical eligibility leads us to. And we've got to look at data, we've got to use technology. I'm sure much of the hearing that I was unable to attend, we talked about technology. I don't want to rehash a lot of the issues that were brought up, but we're at a different time than when Mr. Barnes graduated from college, and a different time when I graduated from college, where the economy wasn't ticking as well as it is now. Unemployment was a lot higher than it is now. And right now, we've got to have systems set up in place that encourage families who may be eligible to get training for the jobs that we know are available. We talk about the SNAP education and training program, and I like to think that I'm a pretty bipartisan person. The Lugar Center says I am. And this committee's been one that has been an epitome of bipartisanship. But instead of working together and trying to figure out a way to help families who may be stuck in this cycle of poverty and eligible for food stamps, eligible for SNAP benefits, that nobody in this dais wants to take away from those who need that benefit, we ran into issues of investing more money into SNAP education and training to help families that may have more children, like was mentioned earlier. They're adding to our SNAP rolls. And we want those kids to get food. We want them to get fed. We want them to get nutrition, not just at school, but at home and during the summers. But at some point, we also want to make sure that their parents, their families have an opportunity to take advantage of where we are as a country economically right now. I've got jobs in my district, in my hometown of 11,000 people, that will pay $70,000 a year to drive a truck to deliver fast food to restaurants and be home virtually every evening. They can't fill the jobs. So why aren't we looking at our SNAP program too to find out who may be on the border of qualification when it comes to categorical eligibility? Why aren't we looking to them to work together and increase SNAP education and training funding to get that person, that family, paired up with our local community college to get that certification, to get that job that's available? Why can't we do that? Data doesn't lie. The data shows we have many families that could take advantage of this economy that we see right now, that could go from one day using what we call our link card in Illinois, wondering what you can and cannot buy at the grocery store for your family, the kids that you want to feed, you want to get them good nutritional food, you wonder what you can buy and what you can't buy. Imagine if we gave them those same SNAP benefits and we also paid for their education and training, and then we paired them up with a job, and they went from wondering what they could buy, and 8 weeks later, after, let's say, one of their parents got a CDL and took that job at McLean Trucking in Taylorville, Illinois. Let's say they went to making $70,000 a year. Why aren't we working there? Why do we have debates over, we shouldn't have a verification process, we should have a verification process. We know there are people that are going to take advantage of any program. We ought to work together to root that out. We ought not protect that type of situation. So I know I got the red light, but I know Madam Chair, Ms. Fudge, is going to let you answer a question, Mr. Davis. But I'm going to take you right down to the wire before you get in. She knows I'm usually good at this. So.
Pressure.
Yeah, I got 37 seconds. Listen, we know the best thing we can do, besides having us come up with the money to invest and pair families who are stuck in the cycle of poverty up with a job, with training to get that job, we also know that technology shows us who they are. Explain to me how technology in your state's working to do what I said we need to do.
We have partnered, thank you, sir. We have partnered with local university, Mississippi State University, working with technology to actually identify those individuals. We've actually helped 200,000 individuals come off of the program in the past 18 months, and they are in a job placement. We can track them now through that technology, through the state longitudinal data system, which I preside over. We also know that by doing that, by empowering those individuals through public-private partnerships with companies like KLLM Trucking Company who have hired those individuals, that we can find sustainable wages for that individual and that family.
And you didn't take any SNAP benefits away from those families?
None.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Sorry to interrupt you. I knew I would end it.
It was good.
Listen, he better be glad I like him because I gave him more time than he should have had.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I see you can speed talk. You sound like one of those people on the commercials that talk real fast. Yes, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I was just listening to your answer, Mr. Davis, even though I cut you off. It's interesting how well your program is working. It's a good thing that you were able to do it within your own state the way that you wanted to do it, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So the flexibility is exactly what you need, right?
Well, from the standpoint of, we've had the advantage of working closely with our federal partners.
Put your microphone on.
I'm sorry. From the standpoint, we have worked closely with our federal partners in developing out that program through a continuum of process through our regional office and our national office. Mississippi and Alabama have partnered with our regional office to do that, along with the Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, as well as USDA to make that happen.
Great, thank you. I mean, are you aware that I was listening to the ranking member and he talked about we should have some say so because it's federal money? Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you also know that you get money for education?
Yes, ma'am.
From the federal government, and they want to tell states to do their own education. Do you realize that you get money for Medicaid from the federal government?
Yes, ma'am.
They want states to do that too. Do you realize that you get money for roads, for bridges? They want to do that too. So I don't understand why they just pick this one thing and say, nope, you shouldn't have any flexibility. You get money from the federal government for a lot of things that we need to hold you responsible for. Ms. Waxman, a wide range of states and territories, including those led by Democratic and Republican governors and officials, are using broad-based CADEL to connect SNAP to households that may have a slightly higher income, but still in need of assistance. Why is it important to support this population that is working its way out of poverty?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I noticed that some of the members have mentioned the importance of emphasizing and supporting work. And in fact, raising that gross income eligibility level does exactly that. Most of the people who are brought into the program then have higher income, more of them have earnings, and they're at risk of being less well off if they get a small raise often, even though they're doing exactly what we would ask them to do, right, to try to be on the path to self-sufficiency. If the benefits are lost and they don't have that ability to raise their income without losing the benefits, that's really a challenge. So the other thing we want to know is that those households are disproportionately likely to have children. So those are also often working families with children, again, on the path that I think we would all emphasize. So it gives flexibility, and we need to realize that working families encounter a lot of expenses. Childcare is huge, and high housing costs is one of the deductions that we're allowed to use under that BBCE.
Thank you. It's interesting that my colleagues talk about training and about work and able body and all of that. Most of the people we are talking about work. Am I correct?
That is correct.
I'm not sure where the disconnect is. Most of the people we are talking about do work. They just don't make enough money to get by. They need a little help at the end of the month. It's not as if they are not trying. And we would make people believe that people don't want to work. Mr. Davis, my friend, even though we disagree on almost everything, Mr. Davis talked about, well, not everything, but most. Mr. Davis talked about people with CDLs. You know why that's a difficult problem in certain communities? Because you can't have had a ticket. You can't have had a DUI. You can't have had other problems. People who are poor have more difficulty because people who have means, when they make mistakes, they get in a diversion program. They have somebody expunge their record. They do a lot of things that people who are just making it cannot do. That's why there's a difference. You know, we have to understand that every single community, every single person is different. People do the best they can. Are there probably some person in the world that doesn't want to work? Maybe, but I don't know them. And I represent one of the poorest districts in the United States. They come to my office every day wanting to find a job. We send them to community colleges for training programs, and then people don't want to hire them. So I know that there are impediments. It's not all rosy. People have challenges. Yes, we need to train more people to work. I wish every single person in this country worked, but we don't. And the reality is most of the people who are on SNAP either work or cannot work. They are either disabled, they're the elderly, they are children. They cannot or they do. And so I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. And with that, I'm going to yield to the ranking member for his closing remarks. 5 minutes, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you very much. I want to say how much I appreciated the tone of Mr. Van Drew. I mean, he clearly is attempting to find common ground, and we actually heard that not just from him, but from a number of people today, and I think that gives us a path forward, which is good news. Dr. Schreier I'm just such a fan of hers, and she's so smart, and so the point she brought up about this 1% fraud, that's different than a number than I had seen before, so if we could ask for that data and have that in the record, and accordingly, I had been asked to provide some information on my 96% and 99%. Yeah, 99, but both numbers are in here as well, so I'll provide that to staff. You know, somebody used the word whistleblower to describe Mr. Van Understand and Sand, and I think that's the right approach. I mean, his actions were not motivated in any way to enrich himself. That money that he received, I don't know if this has come to the fore, but I want to make it clear, it was donated to charities that help poor people. He's a whistleblower who wanted to affect change within this system. And I think we should celebrate whistleblowers in this society to a greater extent than we do. I appreciated Ranking Member Conaway's comments about the need to have a fulsome conversation. There are some changes that need to happen in this system if we're concerned about the benefits cliff, and I am. Some of the panelists did a good job of explaining it. Then let's change that. Let's have an honest reform of that system rather than through distortions of the existing system. If we think the asset test is artificially low, if it is adequated, and I do, then let's change that rather than kind of ignore it through distortions of our existing system. I want to end with a comment that I made, Madam Chair, during my opening remarks, which is something that I believe with my whole heart, and that I think every member on this dais throughout the day believes in their whole heart. We need this program, and we need this program to be effective. And so many of the things that we heard from the panelists today reinforce the fact that that program is worthy and is needed, but maybe obscured some of the improvements that can happen through a reform of the CADL system. Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Johnson, and I really very much appreciate the comment that we do need it. And so when USDA comes forward with a rule to try to get rid of it, let's just stand together. Why was that funny? Let me just say a couple of things in closing. First off, I thank you all for your testimony. I thank you for your time. I thank all of my colleagues for their time. You know, we are, Mr. Davis is right, I'm on 3 committees. He's probably on 3. We are constantly moving. And for the entire committee, I think, to have shown up today shows the importance of this topic. So I thank you all for being here. I take hunger very seriously because I know what hunger does to children. I represent some of the wealthiest people in the world, and I absolutely represent a lot of the poorest. And I know from the people I talk to every day what a parent feels when their kid is hungry, what a hungry kid feels when they go to school. I take it very, very seriously. I take preparing young children for a successful future seriously. I believe that you're right, Mr. Barnes. We should not only allow them to have a meal in school and go home hungry, or go to an after-school program where they can't get milk or juice, or go all summer when school is out and not have a decent meal for almost 3 months. I agree with you. We have to find a way to make sure that hungry people can eat all of the time and not just when they fill out the proper form for the proper place. It is very, very important to me that the system work. Now, I don't have a problem with whistleblowers, I really don't. But when you purposely set out to find a way to make a system that has worked for so long look bad just for sport, there is a problem with me. I think it's great that he gave the money to charity, but it wasn't his money to give. I hope he didn't take it off on his tax return. I just think that we have to understand who we are. And what we are is people who are trying to do the best for the people who sent us here. I will do whatever it takes to make sure that hungry people are fed. We are in the richest nation in the world. There should not be hungry children. There should not be hungry seniors. There should not be hungry disabled people in this country. And so if we blow it once or twice, let's fix it. Let's not try to destroy it because somebody found a loophole or someone found a problem. Let's fix the problem. I'm glad he showed it. I don't like the way he did it, but let's fix the problem. Let's not just throw out the baby with the bathwater because some wise guy decided that there was a problem. I'm going to stop before I go any further. Let me just say that under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question, posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Nutrition, Oversight, and Department Operations is adjourned.
And before vote.
Wow.